I agree to, to a great extent. The first question actually, the JVP is has become a kind of a third alternative. If you are fed up with the actors that were ruling the country for the last 76 years, if you are fed up with the UNP, and if you are fed up with the SLFP, there was a problem because all the alternatives that were there until now were basically either breakaway groups from one of these parties. Sometimes the UNP, there was a split in the UNP, and then there was a party which presented themselves as an alternative. And the same applied to the SLFP. There had been several splits in the past inside the SLFP. And then those parties actually presented themselves as the alternative. So that tradition has come to an end with this election, mainly with the last elections, actually, I would say. JAP presenting itself as the only way out of the crisis. So I agree with the fact that JAP has become a third option, but at the same time, whether it is going to be just another third option, other third party, we will see in the coming months, coming years, actually. And as I think Comrade Jayasin said, we are not actually, as for example, now my colleagues in the JDS, we are just trying to understand the internal dynamics of the country, what is happening now. It's not like just passing judgments on the JVP, the JP is bad, JP is good kind of thing. I think this is not the way politics work. I think the way politics work is we have to look at, for example, I have my own personal experience in the JVP, just like some other comrades in my who are working as journalists now. We have our but the thing is, this subjective aspect, our personal understanding, the empirical understanding of the JVP is not sufficient to understand the dynamics that brought JVP into power. If we don't understand the dynamics that brought JVP into power, our personal history with the JVP is completely, it becomes irrelevant. I think it's irrelevant. But at the same time, this personal experience also matters to a certain extent, because in certain situations we can understand some of the events through our personal experience. Because, for example, let's say, as I said, Anur Kumar Disanayake, Vijita Herath, except the newcomers of the NPP, most of the JVP old guard, we know them. We know them in the sense we were fellow activists, we were in the party, we were comrades in the party, we were working in the party. And we left the JVP in 1995. And I belong to the group that left the JVP in 1995 on the basis when Chandrika declared war on Tamils in 1995 April. We decided to leave because there was an 8-month-long debate inside the JVP. And the debate went on. And we basically said that JVP has a political and a moral responsibility to take a stand against the war. They have not simply a political responsibility, but because they have gone through, like Comrade Swaminathan said at the end, JP has been through in 1971 and 1980s, they have been crushed militarily by the same armed forces. So our simple question in 1995, we tried to raise inside the party, was to convince the leadership that it is wrong for us to support the war. It is wrong for us to remain in silence when we know there are massive injustices are committed against the Tamils in the north and east. So this was the starting point of our debate, but there was a theoretical aspect to it because we disagreed with the book written by Comrade Rohana Vijayveera, the founding leader of the JVP. We disagreed with this book, and we said the book was written in 1985. So 1985. The book was written, and we said the regional politics, the local politics, the regional politics, and the global politics have changed since then. And 1985 is like 11 years before the JP came into parliamentary politics in 1994. So we said basically we have to take into consideration the fact that the Tamil National Liberation Movement has grown into a new level. And the JVP, which produced this book, which produced this analysis about the national question, Tamil national question, the leader, the entire leadership has been militarily wiped out. And the Cold War setting, in the global on the global level, the Cold War setting has come to an end, and now we are going through a unipolar world at that time. So we're basically saying, without considering all these changes and transformations, we can't stick to a book simply because it was written by our founding leader, and it is against Marxism, and it is against the kind of uh, it's against the kind of revolutionary practice. This is what we basically said. So this was a theoretical aspect, and the practical aspect of our position was JAP has a political and a moral responsibility to take a stand against the war, because they know what the Sri Lankan armed forces are capable of. They know them from their own experience. I mean, we are talking about, from our generation, around 60,000 was massacred, slaughtered by the armed forces. And JAP had no right, no political right, no ethical right to forget about this history and to back the armed forces to fight the Tamils. So this was our position, actually. Then at the end of the 8-month debate, we were forced to leave the party. We left the party in 1995 because we could not, due to the principles that we actually held dearly, and also because of the conscience, that's normal human conscience, we could not support the war. We could not stand by the state and to say that we support the armed forces, the operations carried out in the Tamil areas. So we were against that. And that was the reason that actually in 1995, after JP coming into open politics, we left the party. Not when it was an underground movement, but not when it was under military oppression, not when the government was actually hunting down JVPs, we didn't leave the party. We left when it was not difficult to be JVP. So the thing is, like Comrade Kandaya said, actually, I think that this 1965 and 67, the founding year of the JVP, is a bit controversial, because official JVP history says, official history of the JVP, the history that is been taught inside the education camps of the JAP during the underground years, and even now, I think. And even when you go to the JAP's official website about the party history, the official year was 1965. And the reason, I think the reason, to a certain extent, I know why the reason they say it is 1965. Because JAP was founded before Rohana Vijayara officially broke away from Comrade Shanmugadasan's Maoist Communist Party. Before it happened, there were internal discussions inside the party, and the very first discussion which happened in the North Central Province it happened in May 1965 to form a new party. But still, they may have been members of the Ceylon Communist Party, but the process to start a new party and break away from Comrade Shan's party had started in May 1965, and that is the reason the JAP consider it as the year the party was founded. Because I remember in the year that we left the JAP, 1995, there was this 30th anniversary of the party. In December 1995, there was the 30th anniversary in Colombo. So this is a fact that I remember. I think you can check on JAP website which year they say officially when was the party started. But I am not completely rejecting what you said. I think officially JP may have been formed, unofficially may have been formed in 1967 as the JVP. But JP considered the process started in 65 May. And that's the reason I stick to the official kind of narrative of the JVP itself. And also this the class about the fifth class. This classes, the political classes JAP conducted. Now, I was born after the 1971 uprising. I don't belong to that generation because I was born after the uprising. But I was part of the second uprising, which happened in 1987 and 89. And in the second uprising, there were no 5 classes actually. During the second uprising, for the recruitment, JAP had 4 classes. It's completely different from the 5 classes that was there in the 70s. In the 70s, one of the classes was this Indian expansionism, where it was said the plantation workers were the 5th column of Indian expansionist forces. This was said in 1970s as part of the thing. And I think the reason they said it actually was mainly not because actually simply because they were, I mean, the idea of this Indian expansionism was taken from Shanmugathasan's party because of the uh, kind of tensions between China and India at that time. This Soviet social imperialism argument and also about Indian expansionism argument, it had gained ground at that time. So they took this Indian expansionism argument from Shanmugathasan's party and connected it with the proletarians, or the kind of, the destitute, poor people uh, who were in the plantations, who were already facing the oppression of the state because they were being sent back after Sinema Shastri agreement. They had been, they started to send them back to India. So during that period, the reason JAP considered the plantation workers, because they didn't have any basis. They didn't have any kind of support base among the plantation workers at the time. They never had actually. So it came, actually JAP's political ideology is a mixture of Marxism and Sinhala nationalism. It's a mixture of, at the core, there was this Sinhala Buddhist nationalism. At the core, there was this Sinhala Buddhist nationalism. And the outer appearance, they used the Marxist rhetoric. They used the Marxist rhetoric. And one of the significant thing about JVP's history, JVP's fight or the war against the state, the dominant slogan in the war against the state was to defend the state. The struggle that I was part of in late 80s, it was to save motherland, because we interpreted the situation as the state, the ruling class is actually betraying the state to the Islamist. This is the argument. The country was being betrayed by the ruling class to the Islamist and the Indian agents. So it was a war against the state to defend the state. Actually, it's not to dismantle the colonial state. It was not dismantling the colonial state, the unitary state that was actually put in place by by British colonialism. But it was to preserve the colonial structure and to gain power, basically to gain power to rule the country. That was the argument that dominated the JVP at the time. And the other thing is actually what Comrade Jayasingh mentioned, that Anura Kumara apologized in the recent past. He had apologized for the mistakes or the kind of errors that they committed. Now this apology came in 2015, and the reason was actually, he apologized in several interviews like BBC, and there was another interview on the television, Sri Lanka television, where he explained it. He said he didn't explain the dates, but I am explaining the dates what he was referring to. He was referring to the event on April 27th, 2009. It's just like 3 weeks before the war officially ended. The Sri Lankan government announced that they are going to stop using heavy weapons because they think if they use heavy weapons at that point, civilians might get harmed. This is what they said officially. And actually the reason behind it was there was a considerable international pressure to minimize the civilian casualties. I think it came from, including India and some other countries, they were saying to stop using heavy weapons to minimize the civilian casualties. So as a response to this pressure that was building up, the Sri Lankan government on the April 27, 2009, made a statement saying they will not use heavy weapons anymore, considering the drastic effect it can have on maximizing civilian casualties. And then what happened? On the 28th of April 2009, JVP held a press conference where Anura was also present. And they basically criticized the government for stopping the use of heavy weapons. Now, when we talk about a genocidal massacre that happened within the next 3 weeks as well. We are talking about an organization or a party that basically pressurized a capitalist government to use heavy weapons against an oppressed national group.
Tamils.
An oppressed national group, which is Tamils actually. And we are considering whether it is a left-wing or a right-wing party who would, if you put it into simple terms, we are trying to evaluate whether this party is a left-wing party or a right-wing party, which pressurized a capitalist government backed by all the imperialist powers in its war against the Tamils to use heavy weapons on a civilian population more than 400,000 at that time. And then 6 years later, you say it was a mistake. And the way he put it in Sinhala language, the way he put it, during that period, we lost our balance. This is what he said. We lost our balance and we should have showed some concerns about the civilians, plight of the civilians, which we failed to do. And for that, we regret. And there are certain things in the left-wing politics, as far as I know, in the Marxist politics, there are certain things that you can actually self-critically revisit and apologize or rectify. Apologize and rectify. But there are certain things that you can't. You can't take part in a genocide and then say we did a mistake because we lost the balance. Now we are talking about more than 100,000 people getting killed within a matter of 8 months. A left-wing Marxist party backing that war to wipe out more than 100,000 people in a matter of this population who were denied medicine, who were denied food, who were denied any kind of protection, and who were bombed from the sea, from air, and from the ground. And you back that war, and 6 years later, you revisit that event and say we may have made a mistake. And this apology was repeated in April this year when Anurukumara Disanayaka visited Jaffna and addressed Tamil people. He said it in different terms. When he was speaking on state television in 2015, he was telling this in Sinhala. But when he went to Tamils, when he went to speak to Tamils, he didn't say we actually pressurized the government to use heavy weapons. He didn't say that to Tamils. What he said was actually, he said, we were not able to come and meet you, share experience, to know your plight back then because there was a war. And we regret for that. This is not what he regretted in 2015. In 2015, he regretted not for not doing anything, but for doing something. Now, there are two things that you can do. In a war, you can completely stay out of it without showing any kind of concerns to the civilian plight, and then later apologize for it. Or you can actively participate in that war effort, actively mobilize, like the JVP's Lal Kant, the Politburo member recently said on just 4 months before the elections. You can actively participate in that war and say to the military, you did the war and we mobilized the people. Now, this statement was made by a long-standing Politburo member who actually headed still actually heading the trade union front of the JVP. It's National Trade Union Center. The head of the National Trade Union Center is this Politburo member, Lal Kant. And he said in May 2024, after all these apologies, he said there were only two parties who said that we have to, the only solution is war. It was we who said it, and then the fascist JHU said it. So what does the apology means in 2015? In 2024, if you can say and claim the credit for the genocide in 2024 and to say that we did it, what does the apology in 2015 means? Means for the survivors. And so that is something that I tend to disagree with Comrade Jay Singh about that. But this doesn't mean... Yeah. And the other thing is actually, none of these things are basically a judgment. We are not trying to pass a judgment on JVP, but we are trying to, actually history matters. For Marxist, history matters. We just can't, okay, everything is past. Now we can move on. We can move on. The Tamils can't move on. Those who have been subjected to enormous atrocities and injustices cannot move on without revisiting and getting answers that they have been demanding for all these years. And that is what matters. And one other thing I want to point out is in 17th of September, just 5 days before the elections, the current foreign minister, Vijit Herath, who is also a Politburo member of the JVP, one of the most senior leaders, he was addressing the All Ceylon Buddhist Congress in Colombo, a meeting organized by the All Ceylon Buddhist Congress. And he was basically requesting their support for the elections. And he said, there'll be no talks about 13th Amendment of the Constitution, which means the basic power devolution, nothing federal, nothing massive, but the basic power devolution. Its 13th Amendment is part of Sri Lanka's Constitution since 1987, which has not been implemented properly. And he was basically saying from 1987, if you look at it, it's been like almost like more than nearly 30 years now, more than 30 years. And you are saying you will not implement a clause that has been in the Constitution for more than 30 years, and you're promising the All Ceylon Buddhist Congress that we will not implement it. And secondly, he said, no legal action will be taken against the war heroes. He said it on the 17th of September, 2024, just 5 days before the elections. He said, no legal action will be taken against any of the military officers on the basis that they have committed crimes, because we don't agree. We don't believe that they committed crimes. So these things needs to be taken into consideration, not because we are having any kind of prejudices against the JVP, but these are part of the history. These matters. These positions matter. Not the rhetoric what matters, but the practical positions what matters. You can say, people can say, it reminded me, I think in the 19th century, during the first international, when the first international was operating, there was a proposal to have a separate delegation for the Irish, to represent the Irish socialist at the first international. And then the British Labour Party, British socialists opposed it. They said there's no need to have a separate Irish representation because we all come here as a one group. We are one group of comrades, so we can represent the interest of the Irish and interest of the English working class. So there was a debate. And finally, it was granted for the Irish delegation to take part as a separate delegation. But during the debate, Frederick Engels said quite beautifully, he put it. He said, calling, an oppressor nation, basically calling for solidarity of the oppressed nation, saying that we are comrades, so we can forget about whatever that has happened. We are comrades, so we can work together. He said an oppressor nation, a delegate socialist of the oppressor nation, calling the oppressed, the socialists of the oppressed nations to forget about these differences is actually not, he said, it's not internationalism. That is calling to subjugate themselves to enslavement. See, that is not internationalism. In the same way, if you go to Jaffna and tell them we are brothers, we are the same people living in, sharing one island, we are brothers. That is simple rhetoric. That does not address the structural issues of the question what we call as Tamil national question. It does not address the structural issue. It does that because the structural issue involves the state structure that was put in place by the British colonialism. And if you have no plans about dismantling the state, I don't mean that you have to say that we are going to dismantle the state in a election rally. But if your position does not reflect that you have a kind of a will or a kind of perception reorganize the state and reorganize the relationship between the people who are living under that state. That means that is simple, just like Engels said to English socialists, it is just like calling for solidarity without admitting that the crimes that were committed in the name of solidarity in the past. So I think all this rhetoric that will be put into test in the coming months. All the rhetoric about even one other thing I want to mention. I mean, it's part of Comrade Suresh's question because I think the Tamil people in the north and east, I can't say 100% okay, they think about JP this or they think about JP that. I can't say that because I have not carried out a survey or something like that, opinion survey. But the outcome of the election still shows there's no sufficient trust towards the JVP. And which is, I think, for a legitimate reason. There's a legitimate reason for Tamils not to trust the JVP, given their recent past, not about what they taught their members in 1971 about Indian expansionism, but what they did practically. Just 15 years ago, what they did practically and how they celebrated this position 15 years later. They forced the government to use heavy weapons on Tamils, and 15 years later, after all the apologies and all these things were made, 15 years later, the JP say, we actually said the only option is military option. And he says it to whom? To the military. It is the same military that massacred JVP members. So in politics, I think there's something called ethical content of the positions. The politics is not simply policy statements, but there's an ethical content that you have to focus on. And that ethical content of JVP politics is long missing. We can agree, let's hope that it will come back. But for the moment, I don't see that ethical content in any of the JVP policies towards the state crimes. And the simple thing, the last thing is, anti-Rajapaksha campaign of the JVP focus on portraying Rajapaksha as a thief, not as a murderer, but as a thief. Why JVP cannot say Rajapaksha is a murderer, he killed 100,000 Tamils? Why can't they say? Because they were complicit in that crime. You can't accuse Rajapaksha of committing crimes against Tamils because you were complicit in those crimes. So therefore, you save Rajapaksha from being labeled as a murderer or a mass murderer, and you say he's a thief. So the entire election campaign, JVP basically ran on the basis that Rajapaksha has stolen the national wealth. It never said he has also led the military forces to kill our brethren, Tamil brethren. They didn't say it. They cannot say it because they were part of it. So these things need to be taken into consideration when we are trying to understand what lies ahead, what is lying ahead. When we need to understand those dynamics, we need to take into account, not because that we have any kind of personal prejudice against JVP. I mean, most of the people still I can pick up a phone and call them, including Anura Disanayake, because they are friends in the past, if there's a need. But that is not how politics work, I think. I think politics, we need to understand there are certain things, especially who are coming from the Marxist background, there are certain things that you can't betray because these are principles. These are elementary socialist principles. And if you betray elementary socialist principles, the rhetorics don't matter. I think that is what we have learned from the history. Sorry if I have taken too much time, Senthil.